Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, coming to you 6 days a week as we interview whitetail experts and hear their traditions and personal stories of the hunt. Learn more about the latest gear, discover proven tips, and the latest strategies so you can make your next hunt a success. Now, here's your host, Bruce Hutchins.
Whitetail Rendezvous is pleased to announce a partnership with GoHunt.com. Who's GoHunt.com? Well, if you're a DIY hunter, you need the information at GoHunt.com/insider. Why? Because it provides 4,200 profiles, every unit, every species, and every season. Furthermore, they give in-depth analysis, interactive maps, unit access, and seasonal trends. Draw odds are very important, and they give you the most accurate information in the business. All this is available when you go to GoHunt.com/insider. Make sure you use promo code WR when you join Insider. You'll get a $50 gift card for GoHunt.com Gear Shop. All in all, if you're hunting out west in 2018, GoHunt.com Insider is where you need to be to get all the research information. When you use promo code WR, Whitetail Rendezvous receives a small commission from GoHunt.com. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host, and we're heading to Central Kansas. We're going to connect with Paul Smith. Now, Paul's like the rest of us. He works. He's a dad, and he's got not unlimited amount of sits that he can do during the season. So he's come up with a philosophy, a strategy called quantity versus quality, and the hallmark of the whole thing is first-time sits. Paul, welcome to the show, and I can't wait to dive into this quantity versus quality strategy that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about that. We were just on Facebook Live, giving a few examples. So let's revisit those, and let's go back to the beginning where you started to realize, wait a minute, I only have a limited amount of time. I've got to make each one of these sits count. So how did that all happen?
Well, I'll go back to my younger days when growing up, I hunted about anything and everything I could, and with my grandpa, my dad, my uncles, and we used to have a deer camp, and I remember at deer camp that I would try to hunt as much as I could, as long as I could. I wanted to sit longer than the next person. I wanted to get out there sooner than the next person, because I thought, man, if I'm out in the woods longer, if I'm out in my tree stand longer, I'm going to have a better chance killing deer than the next person. And then so happened somebody else would bring a deer back to camp, and somebody else would, and then I was really couldn't figure it out. So I was like, well, I need to hunt harder. And one of the things, the quotes that I'm sure most people hear, and I'll probably get chastised for saying this, but you can't kill one from the couch. I took that, I probably interpreted that the wrong way, thinking that, well, that means I need to be out in the woods as much as I can. To me at the time, looking back at it now, that's probably some of the worst advice I'd ever heard, because it probably on how I took it, because I wanted to be out as much as I could, and that was really quantity of hunts and just hunting and not really thinking about what I was doing and trying to get on a specific buck or trying to hunt from observation stands and figuring out when the time was right to go in. So that I took it differently, that, well, you can't kill one from the couch. We all know you can't kill one from the couch, but I think you got to put in context on when the right time is to go in. If the weather's been crappy for 3 or 4 days and you have south winds and high temperatures, well, going in on that 5th day and the temperature's the same, I mean, deer probably ain't going to be moving that much. But if you wait to that early season front, you're probably going to have a lot better chances of seeing deer or seeing a specific buck. So when I got older, definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. I knew I needed to do something different. And especially when I got that was probably more high school, college time where I could hunt anytime I wanted to. When I got older, full-time job and kids, or my first kid, I knew that I couldn't go out and hunt as much as I wanted to, which was, a blessing in disguise, really, because I started to get on start to listen to these podcasts and listen to all these expert guys that kill big deer, and they produce consistently every year. Like, man, how are they doing that? What are they doing different than I am? And not one guy did the same exact thing. There's not one special recipe out there. But what I learned, listening to all these guys, reading all these articles, was um, I kind of molded it into a quality versus quantity hunt on, waiting till the time is right to go in, on maybe sitting back and observing, and not just hunting, going in to sit in my tree stand because I wanted to hunt and kill something, but waiting until that time was right to go in. And I started doing that because I didn't have as much time. So like, well, I can't be gone away from my family 3 days a week, 4 days a week. I've got to pick that time. So instead of going just whenever, I've got to wait to those conditions are perfect, or that front comes in, then go out there, and my success will be hopefully be better. And over the past years, that's paid off to me. I mean, it's worked for me. I'm not saying it's, everybody has their own way to harvest mature deer. Everybody does it differently, but for just an average Joe that works full-time job and has 3 kids, I mean, it's paid off for me, and I've definitely enjoyed it, and hope I can continue to do it down the road.
Let's talk about a couple of the examples of first-time sits. I know you've taken some nice mature bucks, and we'll save this year's to the last, but why don't you just share a few of those with us?
So going back, it was probably the first year I had my boys, so we'll say 5 years ago. What was one of them, and season started in Kansas mid-September, September 12th or 15th or whatever it was that year, and I didn't hunt at all until October 11th. So I almost waited about a month until I hunted that year. And typically in the past, I was a guy that just wants to, hey, season rolls around, let's go out and hunt. Well, I waited until October 11th, and the reason was that was a Saturday. It had rained like Thursday and Friday. The temperature dropped, north wind moved in, and since it was raining, it was either all day Thursday and Friday or all day Friday and Friday night. I just knew deer were going to be up on their feet that Saturday morning. I had a perfect wind to go into a set I hadn't even been in all year, and I got in there. The thermals, the temperature, the ground was warm, so those thermals was pushing up, and I had deer all over me. I had no idea I was around. Well, this buck came in about 20, 30 minutes after daylight, was going back to his bed, and I shot him at 10 yards, and he wasn't the biggest high-scoring deer, but at the time he was the biggest body deer I'd ever shot. Really big, mature, huge body, and that was one example. Just waiting to go in until the time was right, and that was 11 days into October. Another time, I shot one. Just another example. We had 2 bucks on camera in this area. Middle of the night, it's not like they were giving us any indication that there was daylight. At least the cameras we had and over on scrapes, they were showing up middle of the night. Well, two of them, really good mature deer. So I wanted to go in there and hunt. And again, it was kind of waiting until I thought that the conditions were right. November just rolled around, November 1st or 2nd, and I wanted to get in there at some point because a couple reasons. Because I could drive, this area was and I was spoiled in this sense. This area was between my house and where I worked. I worked 25 miles from my town, from where I live. So I was able to, in the evenings, go by and glass from a long ways away because a lot of these places in Kansas, it's not like they're huge ranches or anything. We're hunting 80 acres here, 100 acres there, right off the county roads. I was able to glass from afar. And I kept seeing deer in this property. Most of the time, this property doesn't hold just a bunch of deer. They move through there, but it's not like they're holding a lot of deer. Well, I kept seeing deer come out in the evenings. I never seen a buck. I never seen the 2 bucks I was talking about, but I seen a lot of deer. Like, man, if there's that many deer in there, those bucks have probably got to be in there bumping those does or checking them. So I knew the time was getting right. So I asked my boss that week, it was Monday, I said, hey, do you care if I pick one day this week to take off? He said, yeah, that's fine. I didn't know what time it was when I wanted to, but I was going to sit back and observe and kind of continue to watch. And he said, yeah, that's fine. Well, just so rolled around. Wind was right a couple of days, but Friday seemed to be the best conditions. The temperature was dropped the most. The wind was perfect for one of the tree stands I wanted to go into. Again, hadn't been a tree stand we've been into all year, hadn't even been in this area all year. So I made my move that morning and got in, climbed up in the tree stand, and long story short, it was a great morning, a great first 30 minutes of daylight. Seen 5 little bucks and 1 doe, and this buck was bumping this doe, and she wasn't in heat, so he just turned back around and where we set up this tree stand. We set it up on 2 trails about 7 yards and 35 yards. And he walked down at 7 yards, had no idea I was there, and made a good shot on him. And he was a high 150s 8-pointer in one of the bucks that I went in after. So that was another example of kind of sitting back until I thought conditions were perfect.
Talk to me about the observation portion of it, because you're doing a lot of observing, but that's hunting. And people, you got to kind of grasp the context of that. If you're in the woods, if you're observing deer from a county road, from a ladder, and Paul's going to talk about the use of a 10-foot step ladder in a little bit, but that's hunting. And so what you want to do is keep closing the deal and get closer and closer till you make your move, as Paul talked about, and then you close the deal. And a lot of guys and gals are doing that. So let's talk about observation.
Well, I'll say this. Listening, like I talked about, trying to figure out how these other guys that do it all the time kill big deer, and trying to learn as much as I could years ago. Adam Hayes, I got maybe some of the best advice, and it really wasn't direct advice. And if people don't know him, he's on Team 200 and kills, I think he's killed 4 200-inch deer and just kills a giant deer. But one thing listening to him, he said two things. The first thing he said, the hardest thing about hunting is not sitting in a tree stand, pulling your bow back and shooting a deer. That is not the hardest thing. The hardest thing, and I'm talking about mature bucks, the hardest thing about hunting is how to go in and how to get close 20, 30 yards from a more mature buck when they're on their feet and they have no idea you're there, or any other deer have no idea you're there and get busted. That's the hardest thing about going in and killing mature deer. That was kind of like a light bulb that went off. And then the second thing he said was, at the time he had killed 7 or 8 booners. And he said every one of those, besides one, has been on first-time sits. And he said he will sit back and wait until he thinks the conditions are perfect to go in to a deer's core area, wherever that may be, to harvest the buck he's after. And he talked about observation sits. He said, just because I'm not in the deer's core area doesn't mean I'm hunting. I'm still sitting from afar, whether it's doing a hanging hunt from an observation sit and having your bow just in case and glassing, or just going out and just glassing from where you can, if you can. I know here in the Midwest we're fortunate enough to do that. Some areas I know you can't do that just because of the terrain and it's thick. But so that was like another light bulb that went off. Like, man, those are things that I've never really put in my arsenal to try to use, and something I need to start doing. So sitting back and waiting until I thought those conditions were perfect. And then you hear a lot of guys talk about, I mean, I almost be willing to bet that some of the best advice guys could give is, or some of the more success stories that they have is that first time in the stand is the best time. And you hear experts talk about that all the time. Guys that kill big deer, they'll say that all the time. So that's something else that, just try to pay attention to, and more or less you're stacking the odds in your favor as much as you can, not knowing that, well, if I go in here and do all this and guarantee I'm going to kill this buck. Well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you're going to stack all the odds in your favor as much as you can to try to get on a big deer. So those are some of the things on the observation. I've only, out of the, I'll just say the last 5-6 years or whatever it's been, I've never seen one of those bucks at all. When I was sitting back and observing from the road, or just waiting till the time is right, I just, everything lined up in my mind that those deer were in there based on trail cameras or something else, and that's when I'd go in there. But I've never really seen one besides this year that I got in and was able to harvest.
Now let's talk about this year's buck.
Okay, so this year, me and my buddy up here, Luke Fall, we try to hit it pretty hard in September, because we know if we have a deer on our ground, we have a couple places we hunt. Like I said, they're not huge places, and some of them don't even have that much cover at all. But if we have a deer on us or by us, we know that there's a good chance early season to get on them, because their patterns stay pretty consistent. So we had 2 bucks on this one particular property, which I've never really even paid that much attention to and hunted that much, just because in the past we really haven't had much to go after. But there was 2 in here, and we had both of them on camera last year, and they're really good bucks this year. Decided to go after. The problem was they are living across the road where we can hunt. Their core area is not on our ground. They come across to feed, to mill around, probably to check scrapes, things like that, and then they're going back before before sunup going back across the road. And it's unbelievable bedding. It's 6-foot switchgrass, and there's a lot of cover over there. So, I mean, it makes sense they're living across the road. So we had them on trail camera. Well, my thought was these are about the only 2 deer that I was wanting to chase that we had at the time. My thought was I was just going to monitor trail cameras. We had 2 trail cameras right off the county road that we could catch them on these trails. So it was really easy to get into and out of. Our access was perfect. You know, we wasn't getting in. It's not like we was bumping deer out. So really easy to get in and out of. And then I was actually putting corn in the core area of our property, in the middle of the property, because that's where they eventually come at night. And that was more just to monitor. Like, I don't hunt over corn really at all, and haven't had success doing it when I tried, but that was more just to monitor the deer in the area. And my thought was, come, you know, when they slip up, it may be end of October, 1st of November, when they're going to come across the road earlier, checking does out, checking scrapes, or go back early in the morning. We'd already figured out the trails, and we'd already had some stands in the area, hung another stand for a specific trail that they were using. So I was just going to sit back, wait, and monitor until I thought the time was right. There was another buck in the area, too, that we didn't really know where he was living or bedding. So I was out really trying to find him, too, to figure out where he was, because I knew these 2 were across the road. So Friday evening, a front came. It was the 28th of September, and I decided to go out. And some of these places are fields that we can hunt, or just pasture, just cattle pastures. So what I started doing this year, I got a 6-foot ladder, and I started taking out with me. Usually in the past of my observations, I've just like climbed up in trees and things like that. This year I took a ladder out with me so I can get up high, and I've put it in the back of my truck before and climbed up in there, or just put it out in the field. And I was trying to figure out where this one buck was. Couldn't see him that night. I was walking back to the truck right at dark, and I looked over in this other field where, by where some of these deer come in to feed, where we'd been getting pictures of them early in the season, and I seen 3 bucks out there. Couldn't really tell which ones they were, but I knew they were bigger body bucks, and I was certain that one of them was one of the 2 that we were chasing. Couldn't verify that at all, but I was like, man, one of those deer has to be one of those shooters that we're chasing. And they come across a lot earlier than they typically do. Typically, it's nighttime, so they're at least over there right at daylight, or right at sunset. And they had to walk by one of my tree stands. Luke, or his tree stand, he hung last year, and nobody ever said it. We hung it last year for specific deer, and we couldn't get on that deer at all, and he ended up getting killed. But anyways, that told me that they're coming across early and may have a chance now to go in and to see if I can get on one of these bucks. That was Friday. Saturday rolls around. Had a family event. Friends had some cookouts, so we didn't go. So Sunday I was planning to go. And typically in this spot, we hunt it with a south wind. It's blowing from the field to the timber, and they're walking that field edge right across from the road. Our tree stands like 45 yards from this road, and we're catching them right when they get across. That's the thought, anyways. We've never done that, but because he hung it last year. 6 to 8 o'clock. The weather is showing it's turning from the south to east to northeast, which is blowing directly to where these deer are coming from. So I knew I couldn't go in because just the wind's horrible, and I was a little bit disappointed. So, well, I'll just go out and maybe try to observe again, or try to scout from afar if I can. I'm out in the field. I'm out in the backyard playing with my kids at like 4:30. That wind shifts out of the north. That cool breeze wind shifts out of the north like 2.5, 3 hours earlier than the weatherman projected. And I called my buddy Luke. I said, hey, is the wind doing the same thing at your house? He said, yeah, it's doing the same thing. It's kind of northeast to northwest. So I just thought about it like, man, if those deer use that trail and they come across that road, they use that trail, and they're 5 to 7 yards from our tree stand, because our tree stand's right on this field edge. And my thought, with that good 15-mile-an-hour north wind, my scent would blow right over the top of them and blow out into the field where they're not going to be yet. So I checked the wind, kept checking the wind, and then last minute I said, man, I got to go. It's coming to an overcast, the north wind's blowing again, just same conditions as Friday. So, man, I have a really good feeling that they're going to be out again early on their feet. So I get out there, get in the stand later than normal, but I knew they wouldn't come across until closer to dark, so I knew I had time. About 45 minutes before dark, I heard something off kind of back behind me where they'd be coming from, and I seen a deer running back to the timber. So he just crossed the road. I'm assuming he just crossed the road, was run back to the timber. my wind was blowing in his direction, but he was about 50 yards out further in the field than I had expected them to come. I thought they'd be walking that field edge because typically I've seen them before, like last year in the summer, they walk the field edge and they go about 200 or 300 yards to this ditch out in the field, and it's away from the road where the cars can't see them. Thought that's what they'd be doing. He was 50 yards out in the field already, and I imagine he smelled me. He could have seen a car or something and just spooked him and got back into the timber. I don't know what buck he was. Well, I thought my hunt was over. So, man, these deer have been running in bachelor groups. Thought my hunt was done. So I was a little bit disappointed. About 10, 15 minutes later, a little forkhorn came from that direction, and he just came from that direction. He stayed directly downwind of me and was feeding. And typically they'll go out and meander in the field a ways or go down further from where this stand is. And then about 5 minutes later, a doe and 2 fawns, they came out right below me, and they was feeding right in this field, right in the same spot. Wasn't going anywhere else, staying right below me, directly downwind. And so far, my wind was blowing right over the top of them. And then all of a sudden, I just, you get that feeling, and I had that high anticipation. I could hear stuff around me. It was getting darker. I had my bow, and I was just very, very shaken, excited, knew something good was maybe about to happen because the way the deer were looking, the mama kept looking around, the mature doe, the buck kept looking around. All of a sudden, here comes the one that we had. We called him Inside Out, and I could see his horns. And after about 5 minutes, he finally stepped in one hole that I needed him to step in, about 17 yards, and I made a shot right before dark. Hit him good enough. He ran 50 yards and piled up, and he was directly downwind of me. All those deer were directly downwind of me, but I think I was high enough. One, my scent control. I'm a fanatic of scent control, and then 2, I think I was high enough, like I had planned, that it was blowing right over the top of them.
Now, where do you park your truck or car when you hunt the stand? How far away?
Well, can you hear me?
Yep.
Wherever. I mean, we try to park as, some of these places are out by people's house. They live out in the country. A couple places we hunt in basically the people's backyard, on their little farm grounds. So we just park at their house or park on a county road, just anywhere that it's out of the line of sight of the deer, and definitely where the wind's good, where we can get in and out.
Yeah, because when you were talking about that, I'm going, okay, so where do I leave my truck so the deer don't see it? Going, okay, that wasn't there yesterday or whatever. And
I just parked in the ditch about a half mile away, and I walked up that same road and climbed into the tree stand. It's a really good entry and exit spot.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Now let's talk about, spend some time. I know you got scent crusher on your hat. Scent control and the importance of that, and how that all works for you.
I'm a stickler of scent control. I think I personally don't think you can just full a big mature deer's nose every single time, but I think you can enhance it and help yourself at least try to get away from smaller bucks or mature does downwind of you. And in my mind, like, you have a big scent bubble around you, and if you don't do anything, your scent cone's really big, but everything you do that can reduce that scent cone just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and to try to make you be as invisible as you can out to a deer's nose out in the woods. So, I mean, I do all the basics, take a bath, wash your clothes in it, do all that. I don't spray down. I stopped spraying down a few years ago because I personally don't think that was helping me at all, and I don't think spray does anything. That's my opinion, because I stopped spraying down and I was getting busted less not spraying down than when I was spraying down. So I don't spray down anymore, but I mentioned Luke Fall, one of his best friends, Nick Jane, works for Scent Crusher in Wichita, and he talked me up on the scent control around Scent Crusher. So I bought me a unit last year, and I use it a lot, and I think it definitely helps. Wash my clothes, and then also use the scent control for the Scent Crusher in my bag on the way, prior to hunting, and then I even use it. I'll turn it on on my way to the drive there that day. Some other things I do as well. Bill Winke I kind of learned something from him. He uses gloves all the time when he goes. He wears different kinds of gloves every time, and he doesn't touch any of his clothing, equipment, or anything with his hands. And I try to self-fill myself, so I've got a lot of stuff in my bag and all that that I touch and handle. Well, I started doing the same thing several years ago. I started wearing cotton gloves, or just I'd go buy some black latex gloves from the hardware store and use those as well and toss them when I'm done with them. And I think that really helps too. I mean, I think it minimizes it. I'm not saying that's a catch-all, but I think every little thing you can do helps. And I use gloves. I don't touch any of my clothing. I get ready when I'm out there. I take all my clothes, put it back in the tote when I get back to my truck. And one little thing I did here, and it may sound stupid, but I had my bag on me at my knee level when I was in that last hunt I talked about, hanging on a limb. And I just thought, man, I need to get high as I can, and just a bag with all the stuff is just more sense. So I actually hung it above my head up in the tree just to get it higher as well, and to help that it would blow that scent over the deer's head. So that's something else that I do, and like I said, every little thing that I don't run ozonics or anything. I don't want to smell like anything when I'm out in the woods. I don't want to have a cover scent. I don't want any of that. I want to smell just non-detectable as possible, and that's definitely helped over the years.
Yeah, I remember a gazillion years ago, Chuck Adams, he used to use baking soda in his cap, and that's why he always had that little green cap on, because it was filled with baking soda, because most of our heat off our body comes through our head.
Yeah.
And, it does. And so, wait a minute, heat, that's scent. And in your nose, when you're breathing, exhaling through your nose or your mouth, that's scent. And there's a lot of things to think about, in scent control, but sometimes the simplest things are the best things, because trappers have used gloves forever. They boiled their traps. There's no scent. There's absolutely no scent. They do have bait, but there's no scent on the traps at all. And they always wear gloves and rubber boots and that whole thing. And we can learn a lot by going past and saying, okay, how were these guys successful? How were trappers successful back? Because in a sense, not sense, pun intended, that's what we're doing. We really are. We're trying to fake out their nose, fake out their eyes, and fake out their hearing. And then, their sense, their inner sense, their survival sense is another thing. I learned a long time ago, don't look at his ear and his eyes, because he knows you're looking at him.
Yeah. Close your eyes.
Yeah, just don't look at him in his eyes. Just look away, look down, whatever you have to do, because they know predators look at them. It's all those little, it's a gazillion little things that add up, and you figured a lot of stuff out. And I would just say to anybody, break your old habits. If you want to see mature deer, if you just want to kill a doe or the first legal buck, that's great. And these little tips and techniques will help you do that. If you want to get after mature bucks, 4.5 years or older, then it's a completely different game. It truly is. And it just, it all depends on what you want to do. If you want to shoot does and fill the freezer, man, invite me over for, some good backstrap, and I'm there.
Yeah.
And because it all works. And it seems like a lot of people saying, I want a little more of the challenge. I want to do it on my terms, not the deer's terms. Because sometimes, in all day sits, you're waiting, especially during the rut. I'm waiting for Mr. Wonderful to come by me. I know he's there, but he might be there as well as 5 other bucks in the bottomlands along the Buffalo River. It could be 3 to 5 miles, so it gets different during the rut. But the way you're hunting them, it's a little more, you're stacking the odds in your favor. And stacking your favor, you have a lot of people that have helped you with your hunting tradition. Let's talk about your grandfather and your dad and your uncles and how they all get you started on this adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that hunted and had hunted before I was even born, and spent a lot of time in the outdoors. We had a deer camp when I was younger, and some of the best memories I ever had was going up to a deer camp. Heck, I think Dad said he was taking me up there when I was about 4 years old, and we'd go for the weekend or around Thanksgiving or whenever, and just spend a lot of time up there. And it was great. I mean, it was able, allowed us to get away and just somewhere to go and just spend time out in the outdoors. And I learned a lot of just really, really good hunting and basic techniques from my dad, my grandpa, my uncles. Teach me at a young age of just how to read sign and play the wind and all those things. And, you know, like I said, it was, of something we had until I was about 21. And then, we jumped around a couple different times of the deer camp, but we always had somewhere to go. And, we got away from it when I was about 21 or so. My grandpa ended up passing away, and then we just got out of our deer camp, and I focused on waterfowl hunting a lot right after that when I was in college. But growing up, I remember just the stories and stuff guys would say, and I was always just, um, if we'd get back, it'd always be awesome to hear other stories, or if somebody killed a deer, they'd bring it in, and then you listen to the story they tell and how they get it, or the sightings they would see, or that morning you'd always wait till somebody come in and just couldn't wait to hear the stories, and then listening to all the stories around the campfire, which I'm sure a lot of them was probably far fetched, but it was definitely great times, and like I said, some of the better memories I ever had, and getting to do that with my grandpa and my dad and my uncles was very fortunate that I grew up doing that, and now 30 years later, I'm still as addicted as I ever been, and still able to go out and very thankful that I can go out and still enjoy the great outdoors and climb up in a tree stand every now and then.
What tips would you recommend to the listeners about the hunting tradition if they don't have one?
Man, I'd say just from how I grew up, just being around the outdoors, it was something that um, it was more like a way of life almost. I mean, that's what we did outside of sports and family. Um, that's the things that we did, and it's just when you're actually starting to chase some of these mature deer, it's hard. It's a challenge to get on a deer, but the accomplishment is just it's unbelievable when you have an accomplishment when you get on one of these big mature deer. But it's something that I think like I'm going to try bring. I've got 3 kids, and I'm going to try to do everything I can to grow them up, to bring them up in the outdoors if they want to do that. If they don't want to do that, that's fine. But I think it's when you're out in the woods, and it's not all about we're talking on here about killing a big mature deer and the strategies behind that, but that's really not what hunting is about. When I was younger, at those deer camps, I wanted to be the guy to kill a big mature deer, and if somebody else did, I'm like, man, golly, how can I do that? And it was all about the kill. And I remember my grandpa saying, I'll never forget it, and I'll always pass this on. And sitting around the campfire, just being out hunting, sitting down, listening to the wind blow the leaves, and he would say, this is what it's about. He said killing a big deer is icing on the cake. Being out and experiencing God's creation is what it's about. And that right there was like, that's the best advice I'd ever have, something I'll always take with me. At the time, I didn't really realize it. I'm like, man, screw that. I want to kill a big deer. But now anytime I'm in the tree stand, man, that's really what it is about. And taking my boy out already, he's 5 years old now, and bringing him up in there. I mean, it's being out in the woods, away from everything, just relaxing, listening to the animals, watching the animals when they don't know you're there, and just enjoying God's creation. And that's the things that I'm thankful for. And it's so true to what he said. Harvesting a big mature animal, that's the icing on the cake. But there's so much more than to just harvesting a mature deer.
Hey, at this time in the show, I'd like to ask you what you wish you knew 5 or 10 years ago that you do now, and how big a difference did that make in your hunting?
I think it's kind of the subject to your show. It's quality versus quantity. Back 10 years ago, my strategy was try to hunt as much as I can and be in the woods more than anybody. And I thought that's how I would kill a big deer. I'm sure that works for a lot of people. It did not work for me. So if I knew what I knew today, what I knew then, or if I knew then, whatever I'm trying to say, I would focus more on quality of hunts, and not be out in the woods as much as I can, and sitting back and observing what I can, and maybe running more trail cameras and reading sign more and scouting more in the off season. That's something I didn't do when I was younger, scouting in the off season and finding scrapes and really good trails and bedding, and then putting that in my back pocket to for the next year. So those things, scouting more, observing more, sitting back, waiting until the time was right, not just hunting anytime I could, but waiting until those conditions were right. I think if I would have done it back then, I would definitely have probably more success. Not necessarily saying I would kill more deer, but I think I would have had the opportunity to be on more big deer.
Thanks for that. And I guess at this point in the show, I want to kind of draw it all in together as far as first hits and the quality of hunt. So, what are the 5 things that pretty much drive you to making a decision to hunt, a specific day?
Well, like the saying goes, if you don't have a big deer in the area, you can't kill a big deer. You got to hunt where the big deer are, right? So, trail cameras are very, very vital to what we do up here and how we hunt. So, you got to have a big deer located. So that's the very first thing. Not just going out and randomly sitting somewhere and hoping you have a deer come by you. So locating a deer is probably the number one thing, and then trying to figure out how to get on him. Well, is he nocturnal? Well, if he's nocturnal at your camera, that doesn't necessarily mean he's nocturnal. That just means he's not showing up on your camera until after dark. Well, where's he bedding, right? So trying to figure out maybe his core area or his home range would be the number 2 thing. I'm a believer, if you stay out of a buck's core area and they're not pressured, they're still going to get up a lot of times and move. They might not be moving that far at all, but if you catch the weather right and the conditions right, they're going to move some too. And you get inside his bubble in his core area, and you might have a chance of killing him. So figuring out where his core area is, and then 3 is waiting till the conditions are right. That might be in a week. That might be 4 or 5 weeks. If you're early season, you might need to wait, for 3 or 4 weeks. And one example, I did that, waiting a long time to go in until those conditions were right. So having that wind perfect, fronts are obviously going to get deer up on their feet when that pressure is increasing. So that's one of the better times to get out and chase one. And then I don't know if I can give you 5, but the 4th thing is probably I will give you 5, entry and exit, having the adequate entry and exit. And you've heard experts probably say, and guys that kill deer all the time, that if you don't, that your spot maybe only be as good as your entry and exit. If you don't have a good entry and exit and you're blowing deer out everywhere, then that perfect tree stand is not going to be a perfect tree stand. So having a very good entry and exit plan is adequate. And last year worked for me. I walked up a creek one time and got my boots soaked, had water come up 2 to 3 feet, but the entry and exit was just perfect. And then the 5th thing is scent control, definitely being up in the tree stand. I think everything you can do to minimize your scent, you're going to be better off, because a lot of times if you have deer come by you, that big buck may not necessarily be that first deer that comes by you. Like the example I had on this last one I killed, there's going to be other deer that come out first, maybe smaller bucks, maybe mature does, and if you can fool their nose, then you have a better chance of killing that mature buck.
Thanks for that, Mr. Paul Smith from Central Kansas, and this has been great. And this is Deer Hunting Mature Bucks 101. I know you're a great student, and you're sharing a lot of information that you've heard from other people. That's one great thing about our sport. We're all willing to share tips and techniques that work or have worked, for us. And with that, I'm going to say thank you on behalf of hundreds of thousands of listeners of Whitetail Rendezvous podcast for being a guest on my show.
Thanks, Bruce. I appreciate it.
Hey, folks, we got a new sponsor. It's called Buckwild Coffee. What's so special about Buckwild Coffee? Well, a gazillion people go to Starbucks every day and drink coffee. Well, why shouldn't Buckwild Coffee offer you light, medium, or dark roast with free shipping? All you have to do is go to whitetailrendezvous.com, go to shop, and order your coffee, and I'll ship it out for free. Hey, thanks so much for visiting Buckwild Coffee. The best brew in the West, the best brew around the campfire, the best brew in the hunting shack, the best brew anywhere. Buckwild Coffee. Get yours today.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.